You will listen to an interview with Mr. Sargent and a customer care officer of a vacuum cleaning company. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hello.
Yes, hello. It's Tom Burlinson calling from Clean It Vacuum Cleaners. Mr. Sargent, is it?
Yes.
I understand you recently purchased a vacuum from us. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Well, this is simply a call to find out if you've been happy with your purchase. Our company prides itself on its after-sales service. Just because you've bought from us doesn't mean you're no longer important to us. Could you spare a few moments to answer some questions?
Sure. How long will this take?
Well, not long at all, Mr. Sargent. Usually only about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. What would you like to know?
Okay, great. I'll just go through the survey form and, if you'll just bear with me, this shouldn't take long at all. Okay, first question. Which model did you purchase and when?
Yes, it was the super cleaner. We bought it about 2 weeks ago. Let's see, it was a Monday, I think, because my wife's birthday was on the Sunday, 24th. That would make it the 25th. Yes, August the 25th.
Okay. Now, do you remember the name of the salesperson? Was he worth remembering?
Yes, his name was Jim. My wife and I were very impressed with him. He was a great source of information, very helpful.
Great. I'll make sure that your kind words about Jim are passed on to him. Okay, now let's see. Yes. Have you purchased any other products from us this year?
Oh, let's see. Of course, we bought the super cleaner. I think that's all. Well, we bought some vacuum bags with it as well. I think Daisy bought some carpet cleaner from your store back in February. That's about all, I think. I have to ask my wife about that one. She's not here at the moment.
No, that's okay. Your answer will do fine. We don't have to be too picky. Okay, so how much money would you say you've spent, all told, in the store? Just an approximate amount will do fine.
Wow, that's a difficult question. I don't really know. The vacuum was £150. The other stuff, I'd say around £15, I suppose. The total was around £165. But I couldn't be totally sure. It may be a bit more than that.
That's fine. Now, the next thing on my list is how would you rate the quality of the products you purchased?
Good, actually. Very good. So far, we've not had any problems with the products from Clean It. Service and value have been very good. So I guess you have a loyal customer.
Oh, wonderful. I'm really pleased that your experience with our company has been a positive one. Tell me, do you purchase any other items of cleaning equipment? If so, from whom?
I'm very fussy about the interior of my car, you know. The seats and carpets, I found a product from Easy Clean which works well on the carpets and an air freshener from Mr. Tidy that really smells good. Apart from that, I couldn't say for sure. I think my wife buys floor cleaner from Johnson Brothers.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10. Well, we've just introduced a new line of car fresheners. You might like to stop by. We'll offer you a 20% discount. Okay, we're almost to the end of the questions. Now, I know you were happy with Jim, but overall, how would you rate the quality of our service?
Fine. I thought it was good. The lady in accounts was a little unfriendly, but overall I would say the service was quite good, actually. Jim made all the difference, and you certainly seem to be a very nice person.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Sargent.
Please, Tom, call me Terry.
Oh, okay, Terry. Very good. Second last question. We're thinking of expanding our trading hours. When are the best times, the most convenient for you to shop?
Oh, I'm not a shopper. I mostly leave it all up to my wife. She works full time. Let's see, For me, I guess I'd have to say Sundays between 1 and 3, and I'm not working on Thursdays now, so if I had to, I guess Thursdays between, say, 11 and 12 noon.
Okay. Last question, Mr. Sergeant. Terry, do you have any other suggestions for us? Anything at all?
Well, come to think of it now, there was one thing. Turn up the air conditioner. I seem to remember sweltering in there, and it was unpleasant and hot. Also, and this is just me, I always like to have some music playing, quietly in the background. It just makes the place seem friendlier, more professional.
Well, I'll certainly mention that to management. Well, that's it. Thanks so much for your time, Terry. If there is anything we can do in the future to help you, don't hesitate to call us.
Okay, bye now.
Yes, bye-bye, and thanks again.
That is the end of Section 1. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers. You will hear an interview with an adventurer, Colin Clark, about trekking through the Sahara Desert. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
After years of planning, Colin Clark finally got the opportunity in the winter of 2002 to visit and trek through the magnificent Sahara Desert. Earlier today, I talked with Colin about the trip and recorded this interview. Colin, thanks for taking the time to talk with me about your recent adventure. Tell me, how many days did the trip end up taking?
It wasn't one of the easiest things I've ever done, let me assure you. Even with the assistance of my 2 travel companions, it was more difficult than I had expected it to be. Let's see, the first day was the 3rd, the 4th. Yes, we arrived back on the 18th, so all told we spent 14 days trekking through and around the Sahara. Although it only got really difficult after the 3rd day. Out in the Sahara you can forget about your nice comfortable bed. Try as I might, I couldn't get comfortable at night, so after day 3 I was feeling weary from lack of sleep. Fortunately, that changed after a few days, but those sleeping bags took some getting used to.
And how did you travel?
Well, most of the trip was either in a 4-wheel drive by land or by river in a type of canoe which the natives call a pirogue.
What was the weather like?
Winter season is the dry season. In fact, our guide told us that it hadn't rained in winter in 20 years. Out in the desert, people don't even bother setting up a tent. They just jump straight into a sleeping bag. You can imagine our surprise when on day 8 we encountered a little light rain. Anyway, on our first day, and I remember this moment well, the sun had just begun to rise. I was sitting on the roof of the 4-wheel drive photographing some of the landscape. At that very moment, we knew we were going to be in for some scorching weather. It was only about 8 a.m. and the roof of the car was getting too hot to sit on. I asked the guide if he knew what the temperature was, and he said it must be at least 85 degrees. That's Fahrenheit, by the way. And this was supposed to be the cool of winter. The rest of the trip was pretty much the same, although at night there was a considerable break in the heat. One night I even needed a blanket, which is pretty common at that time of the year, but it was never that cold.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Highlights. I assume there were many, but are there any moments that really stand out above the rest?
Yes, I'd have to say the simple pleasure of camping out in nature, especially at night, was a highlight. The light of the moon and the stars was just breathtaking. Not a sound to be heard in the still of the night. I won't forget that amazing experience. On day 12, we arrived at the Niger River, where we had to take a ferry across to Timbuktu. You don't know how uncomfortable a four-wheel drive can be until you've bounced around in one for 4 days. In most parts of Africa, you have to drive through mud and deep potholes to get around, and this was certainly the case travelling to the ferry. When we got to the river, there were 26 vehicles waiting to board it.
Wow.
But I'll tell you, finally arriving at the Niger River and getting out of that four-wheel drive was a much welcome break, which I won't forget. The ferry itself was built to hold 5 vehicles and was supposed to take an hour and a half to make the return trip. We realised it was going to take a better part of a day to get on the ferry, so we decided to take a pirogue over to Timbuktu with our luggage, which was another highlight for me personally. The pirogue is an interesting form of African transportation. Basically, it's a modest-sized vessel which resembles a dugout canoe. They're a common way to travel a river in that part of the world. They range in size from 2 to 6 person, but they never carry those numbers in Africa. It's not uncommon to see a pirogue built to carry 2 people actually carrying 8 people, or the larger 6-person size with 20 people on board. But it has to be people that don't place a high value on their life.
I see.
Most of the pirogues are propelled by hand, but a few have motors. There's a larger canoe that they call a pinnace. These are actually quite large. Almost all the pinnaces have a motor and are used mostly for freight or cargo. I'd have to say that I'm very pleased to be safe at home.
That is the end of section 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers. You will hear a conversation between some university students about a recent field trip to a radio station. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Wendy.
I heard your class went on a field trip to a radio station yesterday. Could you tell me about it? You see, I've been thinking of changing my major to communications, or even possibly literature. I'm not really enjoying my science major. In fact, the way I've been feeling lately, I wish I had chosen an arts degree.
I see. Perhaps communication might be a good course for you. I'm really enjoying it. The field trip helped me to see the realities of working in the industry.
That's great. So the field trip was a good experience?
It was a long day. We left at 8:30 and didn't return until about 5:30, so I was tired. But those are the kinds of hours you can expect working in radio. Anyway, although the day was long, it was probably the most beneficial day of study in the course so far.
But Tim, isn't radio dying? I mean, with the internet and television, aren't people using the radio less and less?
Yes, that's also what I thought. In fact, the idea almost stopped me from beginning my studies in radio communication. But after the radio station visit, I was clearly able to see that radio continues to reach nearly 95% of the population.
I guess I'm going to have to change my ideas on the effectiveness of radio. Seems like radio has a huge reach, but are you certain about that? 95% seems a very big number.
Yeah, I thought the same as you, but when I read these figures, I changed my thinking. Here, take a look at this. These figures are for a typical small town.
Oh, I see. The viewing patterns. When people listen or don't listen to the radio. Radio is quite popular in the mornings.
Yes, the listening pattern of the public is quite interesting. I guess, in some ways, the statistics weren't too surprising. Early on in the day, before most people are heading off to work, the number of people listening is quite high.
Around 25,000.
Yes, and as people start heading to work,
mostly in their cars, the number of radio listeners increases quite dramatically. Yes, it makes sense.
And you can clearly see that by noon, the number drops off considerably, only to pick up again around 5 p.m. Probably for the drive home, and after that, well, it's almost non-existent.
So what are most people listening to?
They gave us a graph about that. Let's see. What was surprising to me was how close, in terms of interest between listeners who tune in to win competitions and those who tune in specifically for news and weather. Of course, sports and sports commentary remains the most popular choice for listeners.
Yes. Sports is easily the most popular.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Tim, I'm interested in finding out more about how radio programs are produced. Did they take you behind the scenes and let you see how a radio show is actually made?
Yes, they did. And I learned there's much more to the process than I'd originally thought. Some things are really quite obvious. Take, for example, a 1-hour show. Once you have decided upon your topic, you have to undertake the research, much like you would for any university assignment. You can't simply talk about any old thing. Preparation is very important.
Okay. Then next, I imagine, comes the interview itself?
That's correct. And depending on what you're planning to put to air, you should write out the relevant scripts. There's a lot of preparation that comes with that as well. You should make sure that you have a good mix of open and closed questions. I learned that a good interviewer guides the whole process by balancing the amount of verbal input from both the interviewer and interviewee. Now, a running sheet, which you must also include as a key step in the process, gives details about the length of a particular section of the program. You've got to be very specific, down to the second. This means that the start and finish time for each section of the program must be carefully considered.
Well, that all seems very good, but how does a person get a job in the radio industry? I imagine it's a very competitive field.
Judging from what they said at the station, it's no more competitive than most professions.
So it's easy to find employment in radio?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but there were a few things they mentioned that would increase your chances of finding employment in the field.
Oh yeah? Like what?
Well, there were a couple of things that stood out in my mind, and perhaps not what you might expect. For example, they didn't look favourably upon a university degree. They said it's better to use your time to build an audio library. Things like having a background in the music industry and an interest in certain types of music can actually go against you, because working in different stations usually means exposure to different types of music. So you should be flexible in your musical tastes. Booking a celebrity guest and interviewing them was another way to maximise your employment chances. People are always interested in this type of thing. Knowing people in the industry can also be a disadvantage, because people in radio are always looking for a fresh angle, something different. These were just some of the suggestions made. There were others, but they don't come to mind just now.
Tim, thanks for this information. You've really helped me clarify my position about my studies next semester.
Happy to help. All the best with your decisions for next semester. See you around, Wendy.
See you, Tim, and thanks again.
That is the end of section 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers. You will hear the beginning of a lecture about turkey farming. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. Ever since it was first served and eaten at the wedding feast of Charles XI of France and Elizabeth of Austria way back in 1570, the consumption of turkey meat has continued to grow. In recent years, the popularity and subsequent interest in turkey farming has also grown substantially, and along with this interest, there have been a number of significant changes which have occurred in turkey production, which I'd like to point out to you all. In some of the larger companies in the UK, understanding of genetics has been used to good effect, with selected stock showing an increase in growth rate and a higher proportion of lean white breast meat. Turkey breeding companies operating from the UK have achieved an important position in the European market, as well as having a part of the market share in the USA. Knowledge of the nutrient requirements of turkeys has also advanced, and diets to exploit the genetic potential for rapid growth have been formulated with great precision. Canada and North America have led the way in this area. Different feeding strategies are employed within the industry to control the nutrient intake of breeder flocks. These management techniques usually involve limiting the availability of feed, especially to the older males. The intention is to slow down growth rate, thus reducing the likelihood of leg disorders and to maximise breeder production. Throughout the world, the most serious infectious diseases that have impacted upon turkey health are now almost entirely controlled due to improvements in site hygiene and the introduction of live and killed vaccines. In addition, the geographical isolation of turkey growing farms remains an important means of limiting the spread of disease. Now, throughout the USA and Britain, controlled environment housing now operates with greater precision since the ventilation requirements of the stock are better understood. Approximately 90% of the birds in the UK, for example, are produced in large flocks on commercial sites which require precise control of temperature. Feeding and drinking systems have been increasingly mechanised in order to improve efficiency and to ensure that the birds receive adequate fresh feed and water. Equipment such as artificial lighting is also used to overcome the long winters in some of the more extreme areas of the world. While quite popular early on, a vast majority of turkeys are no longer beak trimmed. However, in most cases where birds are kept in natural daylight, the beaks are usually trimmed when the birds are only a few days old. Now, the turkey industry can be divided into three main categories: primary breeders, breeders, and producers. The primary breeders maintain and develop the quality of the genetic stock within the population by selection of the most suitable individuals. Primary breeders sell parent stock to breeders either as hatching eggs or as turkey chicks, which, by the way, are commonly referred to as poults. General characteristics that are important to the health and welfare of the birds are taken into account in breeding. Things such as the ability of the birds to walk without difficulty, reproductive ability, growth and conformation are all key considerations for breeders. Breeders multiply their growing stock by mating parents bought from the primary breeder. A breeder rears the male and female parents from hatching eggs or poults, selecting the best of them to go on to produce fertile eggs from which the growing stock will be hatched. Breeders sell commercial growing stock. Turkey producers can be divided into two groups: relatively large companies whose farms produce turkeys all year round, and relatively small companies and farmers whose farms produce turkeys primarily for the seasonal market. The non-seasonal producers account for approximately 90% of the output of the UK industry and are dominated by three major companies. The seasonal producers account for the remaining approximately 10%. The busiest time of year for producers, large and small, is clearly the October to December quarter.
That is the end of section 4. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers. That is the end of the practice lab test. At the end of the real IELTS test, you would now be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet.